We are back, Contemporary Black Voices, with our best-selling author Caleb Alexander and the writer Fred. And today we are missing the lovely Dr. Sharon Michael Chadwell. Fred, when we broke off, you were beginning to talk about the Black church. Can you continue that?
What I was saying is that our ancestors turned to the church for deliverance. They were everything. They had nothing else. The government, every institution in the government, the national government, the Supreme Court, the state governments, the local governments, all of them were against us. And so our people turned to the church to deliver us. Now, the church, the church delivered us for not this life, but the next life. And they didn't necessarily deliver us to how to survive in this because I don't know if they knew how themselves. I don't think they may not have. There are some we as we progress through time, we get to Dr. King, Howard Thurman, ministers like that. They were very progressive and they got things done. But if you're going to reevaluate our condition and look to the future, we have to, again, like John Hope Franklin said, start from the source. The source would be the church and everything else after that. And a lot of people, I'm sure the Nation of Islam was here, they'd say the church failed. And a lot of people would say the church failed, but I don't know.
I would have to say today that the church has failed. I mean, because you're saying we have to look for the church to basically deliver us, but
at that time, talk about
yeah,
first came out.
Well, we need the church right now.
Yeah,
but we ain't got them.
But we don't. But we the level of religiosity in the Black community has declined significantly. So we're not the younger generations aren't in church as much anymore. The average age of is about 65 now, and so the churches, they used to preach a liberation theology. Now the only thing they want to liberate you from is your money. Your money.
Yeah.
You're right. So that's gone. And
prosperity ministry.
Yeah. So So the church is transformed. The membership of the church is transformed. And so I'm not sure if that's a vehicle. But speaking of that, after that decline, there was no other vehicle to take its place.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so you have organizations that came up, Rainbow Push, National Network, but there's no defining organization that can bring us together to set an agenda for this reset. And so I think that's one of the biggest issues is us coming together and say, okay, you know what? They're attacking us as far as diversity and equity and inclusion. They're attacking Black history. They're attacking, our educational programming. They are, just everything that DeSantis is doing in Florida is anti-Black. You have this idiot, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who is saying that teaching Black history is teaching racism. You have the state legislature in Texas, who's mandating that state universities take into consideration ACT and SAT, and that right there, they clearly know it's studied and it's well documented that Black kids score lower on
but
those
wait a
test
minute,
scores.
Caleb. You talked about we don't have an organization that can really help us, and I would say you and I probably would agree that the NAACP right now has failed us. I think Fred would probably say differently, and I think
I'd say different.
and I think maybe all three of us
Why
might,
do you think I'd say different?
because you've been supportive of the NAACP. Sometimes you're back and forth. You the flip flop man.
Let me see if Dr. Chadwell left him here.
it's flip flop. But no, seriously, when you look at the situation now, I think NAACP, who we could depend on before, we can't depend on anymore. The church, who we could depend on, we can't depend on really anymore. So you came up to the conclusion, is what you just said, is that we really don't have anybody to help usher us into where we need to go.
Right.
What do we do?
Okay, I got to defend myself.
Go for it.
Okay.
I'm going to scoot over here out the way.
I have never, and I'll challenge you to go back through all our tapes. Chet said that the NACP was not effective. I've never said that at all, because
That they were not effective?
we're not effective. I've never said that. I've only said we need to look at what they're doing to see if they're effective. I didn't take a position. So
Well, let me ask this. But let me ask this. They have been effective at one point. No, I'm saying in the very early time, they were effective. When Thurgood Marshall and those people were there and they were doing it, I think they were effective. But since that time,
all I said was that what they do, and this, having interviewed the president here and other people, they do their work behind closed doors.
Right.
That's how they do it. So by doing it that way, we don't know how successful they've been. So I didn't say they were not effective. I just said they don't share what they're doing with, and it's crazy. That
That's fair.
NACP's always been like that.
Well, I mean, and you, I'm turning to you as a historian. How effective were they even in the 60s? My thing is this. So they sent out, Brother Carmichael, they sent out.
who you talking about? Stokely Carmichael?
Yeah, they sent out the youth organizations to hit the streets, right? So my question is, how effective were they? And we know it was the young folks that were out there.
Are you talking about then or now?
I'm talking about then.
Okay.
Then,
Okay.
right? It was the young folks that were out there marching and taking the brunt of those batons and fire hoses.
In fairness to NACP, their position was never social protest. They didn't believe in it. They thought everything should be done through the courts.
Okay. Right.
And they had that confrontation with Dr. King. In fact, Thurgood Marshall had a confrontation with Dr. King because he did not believe everything should be done through the courts.
Right. Okay.
So if you look at what was done through the courts, it wasn't necessarily the protests, Montgomery bus protests, that didn't end it. It was the NAACP arguing in court that transportation should be integrated, and the court agreed with them, and that's what forced the people in Montgomery to open up those buses. It was a Supreme Court decision.
Okay, but when we seeing those young brothers and sisters who part of SNCC, who went out there and were getting beat, and seeing the blood on television, seeing the people getting bit by dogs and washed by fire hoses, and so that brought a moral element to the movement, and white folks that brought that violence into white folks' homes via television, and so that pressure changed the movement. It changed the trajectory of the movement. It brought white folks in. It brought white folks from the north to the south to assist in that. But those were students. Those are young folks. And so my question is, how effective were they even back then?
And let me add to that, since we did talk about, we kind of, I don't know if we were on air when we talked about the Jews. A lot of those students were Jewish students.
Yes.
They got on those buses
And came south.
and went south. Yeah. That was not, again, I go back to you could evaluate the NACP tradition if you want to. That's okay. Their tradition is not that kind of confrontation. Their tradition was in the courts.
Okay.
And if we look at them only from that perspective, they were pretty successful.
Let me stay with you on this. One thing that we talked about in the first segment that we have not talked about is the education piece. And I want to come back to you, Fred, and talk about the education and open up that discussion about we are being faced with so many things. Books being taken out of the schools, not teaching slavery in schools. How are our kids, okay? White folks are basically thinking about their kids, but how do we make sure that our history is taught? What do we need to do?
For a minute, I'll go back to the churches. Okay. If the church on every block.
Sure.
If every one of these churches had a Saturday session where they teach our history, the Jews do that with their kids. They teach them about Judaism. They
Yeah.
some kind of, then they
Right. Some kind of rights and
Yeah. If all these black ministers would do that every Saturday, and they can get to the sisters. You tell the sister, make sure you bring your kids to this training. Then we wouldn't necessarily have to worry about, because unless we can break from that that right wing Texas Education Association in Austin that sets up the curriculum
Or the Florida
or
education.
the Florida education. How come we have to go to doing it ourselves? But our ministers are going to keep like they have done for a long time. Want to tell you how to get to heaven, but not how to live a good life here. You know,
Right. And so
that would, yeah, our education is hurting. But again,
Right.
man, I you know, you guys don't like the way I turn inward.
No,
I got to turn
I'm-
back inward to ourselves.
I'm with
man.
you. I'm
gotta-
with you.
We got to do something.
You stealing
got
my
that.
thunder. That's my
That
line.
is not.
But no, but you know what? I want to make this point though. Even if we did turn toward the churches, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable having some of those ministers teach my kids history.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. It'd have to be a total different mindset for these ministers because their only concern, not all of them, I can't speak for all of them. A lot of their only concern is they're building a bigger church, more money, so they can be driving, not no longer, it's no longer
Mercedes.
Cadillac.
No, they want Mercedes
They
now.
want Mercedes and Jaguar. You know, that's what they're concerned about.
Right.
I hate to get off. I hate to get off on this, but I think you bring up something very interesting. And I know we were talking about education, but when you talk about religion, and you talk about church, should we now be looking at and asking the ministers to look more about helping us as a race, as opposed to helping us to get to heaven?
Well,
Okay.
absolutely, and that's the problem. Because as long as my daughter went to a Baptist church in California, and I went with her. And here's how the deacons bring the minister out. Okay, hold up your Bibles. Everybody hold up their Bibles. This is my Bible. Everything in this Bible is true. And if your son's in jail, turn to Jesus. If you can't pay your rent, turn to Jesus. If such and such happened, turn to Jesus. I looked at my daughter and said, Dad, neighbor, where Jesus out? You know, everything. Because if you
Right.
get them to do that, who is the closest person, even though they shouldn't be, according to us, Jesus, is the preacher. And so that keeps the preacher in his position. And they don't want to deviate from that at all. And especially since we no longer have the social ministry of King and Shuttlesworth and those ministers. Now you got the prosperity ministry. But I don't know. I was listening to somebody and they said this black minister's got a ATM machine in his church.
A lot of them do.
Yeah, a lot of them do.
A lot of them
In
do.
the church.
Yeah.
Well, look, let me, we're coming to the end of our segment right now, but it's been an interesting discussion. I want to thank both of you for making it that. And I think it is a topic that we probably need to explore even more. Even though we had the time that we had, we didn't have enough time. So we're going to take a break now. When we come back, we'll talk about the hot topic. But before we do the hot topic, we're going to talk about the mailbag.